Hello everybody, this is Accidental Talmudist, and I am Rabbi Abbish Rand. Glad to be here with you today, and I am filling in for Sal, and we were just listening to Shlomo Katz singing Likrat Shabbat, or Likras Shabbos. And to start, let us and bring some light into the world. Okay, that being said, let us welcome some of our listeners. We have Kathleen Fabry from Anaheim, or Bill Eldridge from rural Kansas, as well as Brandon Sullivan. Oops, missed that. Patrice Carter from St. George, Utah, and Randy Lieberman Herman from Florida. Shalom to you as well. And John Shore from Sedona, Arizona. We got people all over. It is great to be here with you. And just to start, I'd like to share with you my own accidental Talmudist story. So I grew up in a religious home. That's Orthodox Jewish religious, and started studying Talmud at the age of probably 11. But that was just on a very basic level. And when I was in high school, there was, or actually maybe it was post-high school, I was studying at a yeshiva, and it came time for the Siyam Hashas. So we're going back 22 years. And before that Siyam, I had made plans with other fellows in the yeshiva, other people in the community, to hire a bus. We were going to be going to New York, and we had ordered tickets 6 months in advance. We were ready to go. We had the buses. We had gotten permission from the yeshiva, and last minute, literally a couple days before, the yeshiva decided that they weren't letting us go. They weren't letting us take off. And it was actually this time of year. It was right before Rosh Hashanah. I think it was right before. And they didn't let us go. And I kind of made a commitment to myself at the time and said, well, next time nobody is stopping me from going to the Siyam. And I started Daf Yomi then, and really went well. The other guys in yeshiva thought that it would be a passing phase, although some other students also joined in at the beginning, and then they asked me to give a daily shiur to them, a daily class, which I did do for a while, which was the first regular Daf Yomi class that I gave. And then most people fell out. I continued going, And once we got to the smaller tractates, there's a bunch of them coming up, and the next one is not, but after that comes a bunch of smaller ones, and once I was making parties at the end of every tractate, and the guys kind of got used to that and kind of stopped making jokes and started just enjoying the partying. So that was my accidental Talmudic story, because it was in a way being refused from that first siyum, and in a way it was the goading of my friends that actually encouraged me, and here I am today. I was a little bit late on that next siyum, but I did go to that next siyum. I did make my own siyum, and now I am been invited by Sal Litvak, one of the greatest Jews around, to join his movement, and I'm really excited to be here. Okay, that being said, yesterday's daf in Eruvin, page 9, dealt with some important things that are going to be relevant for our discussion today on page 10, so I'm going to go back to them. Rabbi Parry introduced the concept of lavud, which is that when you have a space in a wall of less than 3 tefachim, less than 3 handbreadths, the principle of lavud tells us that you can view that we view that space as filled in. So anything less than 3 tefachim, 3 handbreadths, is considered basically solid wall, and that's going to come up again numerous times, and I just want to start by putting that out there. The part that we did not get into yesterday, which is very important, is on page 9b, where the Talmud introduces the concept of what if you can see the lechi, you can see the post, the side post, from the outside, but not from the inside. So near mi b'chutz v'shavim mi b'fnim. If you're standing inside the alley, you don't see anything. It's a straight wall. If you're standing outside the alley, you see it poking out. And I am going to show you a picture. My Gemara has really good pictures. Here we go. So this picture over here, as you can see, the wall ends really over here, but there's a piece sticking out. But if you're on the inside of the alley, you don't see that it's sticking out. If you're outside, you see something protruding. So the question the Gemara discusses, and it's actually an argument, which way to go, which way to judge it, is whether when you can see that side post, when you can see it when you're standing on the outside, but it's not visible to the people inside, does that count? And we'll get in a couple of days. We'll get into the reasoning behind that. I'll just throw it out there a little bit, which is how we're reviewing the side post. Is the side post is its purpose for the people inside to give them like a wake up call, like, hey, catch yourself, or is the purpose of the side post as a substitute for a wall? Is it actually replacing a theoretical wall? Or is it just a heads up? So that's really what this goes into, because if you can't see it from the inside, but it's a theoretical wall, that doesn't matter if you can see it or not. But if its purpose is as a heads up, well, then that gives more grounds to say that it wouldn't work, because there's no heads up. That being said, the Talmud then brings a Beraita, a Tanaic statement from Rabbi Chiya, and brings that picture that I just said, quote a Tanaic statement from Rabbi Chiya, that a wall that one side of it goes in more than the other side. In other words, like the picture that we saw, that part of the wall is narrower. So therefore, creating a situation that from one end, from one view you could see a protrusion, the other side you cannot. So Rav Chiya says that would work. That would work as a side post. And Rav Chiya, the one arguing with him is Rabbi Yochanan. So that's the first ground rule over here. This concept of when you can see from the outside but not from the inside. Now the Gemara tries to prove whether that would work. Being that we have an argument, so the Gemara wants to bring a proof and show that one way or the other, does it work or not? So the Gemara brings a case, and this case is also very, very important because it comes up again and again. It's going to be quoted several times, even over the next couple of pages, and that is the case is brought that a chatzar ketana, a small courtyard, shenifritza l'gdayla, that was broken open at the end of it, and at the other side of that wall is a large courtyard. So there's two courtyards right next to each other. One is smaller than the other, and the back wall of the smaller courtyard is broken totally open, leaving it totally open to the larger courtyard. So the Beraita says, Gedolim muteris, the larger courtyard, you're allowed to continue carrying in there. You're allowed to use that space, but the smaller one is impermissible. And the smaller one, you lost the usage of that space. Why? Because it's like the reason why the larger one can still continue in their way is because it's the smaller one is now just like an opening to the larger one. It's just like a doorway. But the smaller one is totally wide open. So we have a problem. So now the Gemara wants to use that and say, hey, 1 second, if what we just posited from Rabbi Chiya, that when you can see it from the outside but not from the inside, it works. So why don't we view the walls of the larger courtyard that extend past the smaller courtyard? Why don't we view those as the sideposts for the smaller courtyard? And I'm going to show you a picture. Get a better picture in the back over here. Sorry. Took out my bookmark. So in the bottom picture of this page, you can see the smaller courtyard in the backyard, in the back, the bigger courtyard in the front ground, and then you see the wall of the bigger courtyard is extending past the opening of the smaller one. So even though the smaller one is totally open, but you have that wall to either side of it that's left over from the bigger courtyard that should work as a sidepost for the smaller yard, if you're able to view it, if you consider viewing it from the outside as effective. So being that we're not viewing it as effective, we can prove, ostensibly, that when it's visible from the outside, that's not good enough. So the Gemara brings several reasons, or in varying stages, of why that's not necessarily a proof. First, the Gemara brings from Rabbi Zera, who says that we're talking about where the walls of the smaller courtyard actually extend into the larger courtyard. So it doesn't end at the larger courtyard like the other picture I showed you. Rather, the walls of it keep going into the larger courtyard. So therefore, that back wall of the larger courtyard can't work as a sidepost for it because it's not right there. So that Rabbi Zera says, if that being the case, then there's no question because we still maybe can say that viewing it from the outside works. Just over here, there's nothing to view from the outside. So the Gemara says, 1 second, but why don't we say lavud, right? The concept we mentioned earlier of lavud. And so let's say that from the wall that's coming in from the smaller courtyard to the side wall of the larger courtyard is only 3 tfachim. Let's say that's only three hand breadths. So if you look at that as closed, So it doesn't matter that the wall is extending inside. So you're counting from the wall to the side wall, and that's as if there's a post over there. And then it would work. So again, we have a reason to believe that viewing it from the outside does not work, because even though it extends inside, we should say the concept of lavud, and it should be a workable situation viewing it from the outside. So the Gemara says, well, maybe it's actually much more distant. Let's say it's more distant from the walls. It's not. You don't have three hands breadths. Maybe the larger courtyard is much larger, and you wouldn't be able to say lavud. So the Gemara brings from Rav Ada bar Ravimi, who stated that actually this case of the two courtyards, the smaller one was 10 cubits wide and the larger one was 11 cubits wide. Now a cubit is 6 handbreadths. So if the smaller one was 10 cubits wide and the larger one was 11 cubits wide, that leaves only 3 handbreadths extension on both sides. So we should be able to say lavud, and we should be able to therefore have that be considered the sideposts for the smaller courtyard. And being that we don't say that is proof that we don't view from the outside. We only look at it as a sidepost if you could see it from the inside. I do understand that this is very technical. I'm trying to break it down so that everyone can follow. We'll deal with questions at the end. Hopefully, I'm saying this, we're getting this clearly. Now, so we're left right now with this supposition. There's only 3 handbreadths on either side. We're not saying lavud and counting that as a sidepost. Must be that we don't count viewing from the outside as valid. But then the Gemara says, the Gemara brings Ravina, who says actually it's separate, and the question is why don't we? Why don't we say lavud? So Ravina says, well, actually it's not centered. The smaller courtyard is not centered, and therefore it is 2 hand breadths away from one side of the larger courtyard, but 4 hand breadths away from the other side. So on one side you would be able to say lavud, but you wouldn't be able to say lavud on the other side because it's 4 hand breadths, and 4 hand breadths is too much to view that space as closed, and that's why it would not work. Not because viewing from the outside doesn't work, but rather because you don't have a lavud because the space is too great. The question is, obviously, as the Gemara asks, why don't we just say lavud from one side? We know that you only need a side post on one side. That's the primary opinion, right? We said is either a crossbeam or a side post. So if you can say lavud, if you can close up that space on one side, then you have your side post, and that should be kosher. You should be able to. It should be if you can view from the outside, that should be fine. So Gemara says this case is following the opinion of Rebbe, and this is going to come up also again. Rebbe, and his opinion is that you need a post on either side. You need 2 posts. And being that you need 2 posts, and one side you can close up because it's 2, and the other side you cannot close up because it's 4. So therefore, that's why it's not going to work. Now, the Gemara says, 1 second. If we're going to say the Gemara, right? Because so we're left with inconclusive proof from that case of the smaller courtyard and the larger courtyard, because the reason why it doesn't work may be because it's Rebbe, and even if you could view from the outside, even if when it's viewed from the outside it would work, but since we're dealing with the opinion of Rebbe, who needs on both sides of it, and we don't have the ability to have a side post on both sides, that's why it doesn't work. So the Gemara says, 1 second, that's not exactly so, because if we say that viewing from the outside but equal on the inside does not count as a side post, and Rebbe holds of Rabbi Yosef that a post, meaning since we said Rebbe holds that you need 2 posts, but not only that, that Rebbe requires a post be at least three handbreadths, meaning it's not enough to say that he requires a post on both sides, but that each one has to be at least 3 handbreadths, and that he does not hold. Right? Let's say he does not hold of the other two posits that we just came up with. Rabbi Zera, that the smaller courtyard goes into the larger courtyard. Let's say we're not talking about that. That's not the case. And that the other hypothesis of Ravina, that it was not centered, that it's 2 on one side and 4 on the other, let's discount that as well. So Rebbe requires a post on both sides, and he requires a post of 3. So the fact that we don't now view the back walls of the larger courtyard as the sidepost for the smaller courtyard, that would be proof that you don't count it when you could only see it from the outside. That would work, right? So if we're trying to prove that being viewed from the outside is not enough, that would only work, that would make sense if Rebbe is requiring 2 sideposts, both of 3 handbreadths, and we don't have the other hypotheses going over here. It's not talking about where it's going into the larger courtyard, and it's not talking about where it's off center. It's centered. So now the only reason why it wouldn't work is because it's only viewed from the outside. Because you have everything that Rebbe requires. 2 sides, a post. Both of them three handbreadths. But still doesn't work, that's a conclusive proof. So that would make sense. And that would make sense why the case is talking about a smaller courtyard of 10 and a larger courtyard of 11. Because we're trying to give the exacting circumstances where we would have this proof. So if you have a smaller courtyard of 10, a larger courtyard of 11, and it's centered, and it's not going in, and you're still not counting it, that is a conclusive proof. And that makes sense why the case would have had to be a 10 into an 11. But if you're going to tell me that being viewed from the outside and not from the inside does work as a sidepost, and the issue over here, the reason why we have a problem is because the courtyard, like we said, Rebbe said, the courtyard of the smaller courtyard goes into the larger courtyard, and like Ravina, that it's not centered, and that's the problem. And Rebbe does not hold a Rabbi Yosef. Rebbe holds you need 2 sideposts, but he doesn't hold you need specifically 3 handbreadth sideposts. So then, if that's the case, because the Gemara gave this whole list of things to define that case. If all those definitions are correct, then why does the small courtyard have to be 10 and the large one 11? Why are those measurements specific? It could have been talking about a small courtyard of 10 and a large courtyard of 10 and 2 handbreadths, because the larger courtyard just has to be the smallest bit larger, and then the whatever bit larger it is, that's enough to be a side post. And then we would say, the fact that we're not counting it is proof that being visible from the outside doesn't help if it's only visible from the outside. But the fact that the Beraita gave such a specific measurement of 10 and 11, going larger than what it hypothetically would have had to prove the point of being visible from the outside working. So if it was trying to prove that being visible from the outside works, then it should have given us a case a smaller measurement. The fact that it gives this large measurement, which fits in with Rebbe without adding in all these extra qualifications, is proof that being visible from the outside and not from the inside does not work. And the Gemara finishes off that that's a conclusive proof. Now, we're going to see something very strange right now, because although the Gemara just finishes off Shema Mina, we see from there, that means, okay, that's a good proof. The Gemara then goes into something very interesting. The Gemara, and we're not going to necessarily cover every detail of it, But the overall piece that the Gemara now goes into is that Rav Yosef said, he announced, give me 1 second. Right. So he imagine that this whole proof that the Gemara just brought, that the Talmud just brought, was parenthetical. And now Rav Yosef is commenting on the last thing the Gemara said before that, which was that Rabbi Bar Huna said in the name of Rav Huna that when it's visible from the outside but not from the inside, that it works. It works as a sidepost. So the Gemara brings Rav Yosef now, and Rav Yosef said, I don't remember such a memra. I don't remember such a saying. I don't remember ever hearing such a thing. Now, important piece to know over here is that Rav Yosef got sick. He went through an illness, and when he recovered, he had lost his memory. He forgot he forgot everything that he had learned. And Abaye, his student, basically retaught him everything that he had learned from him. So we find this all over the Talmud, numerous times, that Rav Yosef will say, I don't remember hearing such a thing, and Abaye will come and say, no, actually, not only do you know this, but you actually taught it to us. So that's exactly what happens over here. Abaye says, At Amrit Nialan, you told it to us. Not just that you know it, you told it to us. And what did you tell it to us about? And this is the case you told it to us. So, this is the context. And then Abaye goes and the Gemara quotes the context where Abaye says, you, Rabbi Yosef, you taught us this concept that when it's visible from the outside, it works. So the Gemara then, after bringing Abaye's statement, the Gemara says, and so is the halacha. The ruling follows this that Abaye just said, this that Rabbi Bar Huna said. The ruling follows that when it's visible from the outside and not visible from the inside, it still counts. It still works as a sidepost. So the Gemara has an excellent question right now. The Gemara says, 1 second. We just had a conclusive proof. The Gemara finished off saying, yes, you have just proven that it does not work. And now we're saying that the halacha follows the opposite. If we have a proof that it doesn't work, then how could you say the ruling, the law follows what we just disproved? So Gemara says, well, you might have a good proof from one place, but on page 9b, we brought a Beraita quoted by Rabbi Chiya. And Rabbi Chiya trumps any proof. Why? So, to tell a little backstory about Rabbi Chiya, for those of you who were not here by Brachos or forgot, but the Talmud in the first tractate, Brachos, on page 38b, gives a very specific praise about Rabbi Chiya. Now it's not common to find specific people very not just praised, but also specifically praised in the Talmud. And that's the kind of thing that that's the kind of shingle you want to put up. That's the kind of, diploma you want on your wall. So what does it say about Rabbi Chiya? Rabbi Chiya, the Gemara there says, Dieg v'gomer shmaita mi Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi, that he was exacting and he would learn his whatever sugya, whatever topic he was learning from his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan. And he was very exacting in making sure that he got it exactly correctly from his Rebbe. That's number one. That's number one reason why we respect what he had to say. And number two, that every 30 days, he would review whatever he learned in front of his Rebbe to his Rebbe. He would, not only was he exacting when he took it in, but then he repeated it back to his Rebbe every 30 days. So he had it cold. And that's the kind of person that you could rely on and say, hey, yes, we have a proof from a different Beraita, and it seems to be a really good proof, as the Talmud itself testifies. But being that we have Rabbi Chiya saying otherwise, we're going to go with his. And part of that is because it's really about conflicting Braisos. A Beraita statement, yes, is a Tanaitic statement, which is similar to a Mishnah, but it is from a body of work that came before the Mishnah that was not put together as a comprehensive and exacting editing as when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put together the Mishnah. So whenever we have a Beraita, we're going to want what we're learning to follow it and to everything to work together. But when it's a Bryce up against the Mishnah, we'll try to get them, on the same page. But if it doesn't work, the Mishnah is going to win. So over here we're saying, well, here we have a Bryce against a Brysa, but one of those Brysas has Rabbi Chiya backing it, and therefore that is going to be the conclusive law. The legal ruling will follow that, and therefore that is the actual law that it just has to be visible from at least the outside. Okay, next. We do have a couple more important things to cover today. On 10a, there's really one more main thing that I want to bring out. I'm not going to get into it so much, but I want to point out what the Gemara is talking about, mostly because it's going to introduce us to an important concept. And that is, the Gemara starts off talking about till now we've been talking about really the height of the mavoi and how high the marker is allowed to be. Now we're going back to the Mishnah, where the Mishnah said if it's wider than 10, right? Before we was talking about higher than 20, and whether you have to lower it, higher the bottom, and so on and so forth. Now the Gemara goes back to the other statement of the Mishnah, which was when it's wider than 10, you have to narrow that opening. An opening wider than 10 is a problem. So the Gemara brings now the Mishnah did not quote Rabbi Yehuda on that. It only quoted Rabbi Yehuda as saying you don't need to lower when it's too high. But we have elsewhere that Rabbi Yehuda said it's the same statement as far as when it's too wide, you don't need to bring the walls in. You don't need to narrow that opening. So the Gemara wants to know, how wide is Rabbi Yehuda okay with that opening being? Like up until fine 10 is okay. How much further than that is he okay with? You can't have ad infinitum. If it's so open, then where's what's the partition? So the Gemara tries to bring a proof from an interesting case, and that's what I really want to talk about over here before we go further. And the interesting case is the case of a well that's in a public property, it's in a public domain, and on Shabbos you need to be able to get water. So how do we solve the issue that it's in a public domain? How do you remove the well? Inside the well is a private domain, but as soon as you take the water out of the well, it is now transferring from a private domain to a public domain. So the rabbis enacted a solution which entails putting bracket-shaped posts at each corner. So an L-shaped bracket on each of the corners surrounding this well, and the spacing from one bracket to the other is 13 1/3 cubits. So the Gemara wants to bring a proof from there that Rabbi Yehuda, that's the maximum Rabbi Yehuda would allow this opening in the mavoi, this opening to be before you would have to bring the walls in or narrow that opening. And the Gemara does not conclusively prove that. But what I do want to bring out from over here is this interesting case of this pasei birais, the brackets of the wells, which we are going to come into this concept over the next couple pages, which is when we're dealing with water. When it comes to water access, the rabbis were very concerned and very interested in making that access available. And therefore, even though normally we would not allow such a wide opening, and even though normally we would not allow a situation that even when we do allow a wide opening, normally we require that the standing part of the wall, the actual physical part of the wall, is there's more of it, as we'll see in a moment, than there is of the opening spaces. So even though we allow the opening space, but there has to be more space that's closed. So over here, though, there's most of it's open, and it's a larger opening than we would normally allow. But because it has to do with water access, which is obviously a very important part of staying alive, so the rabbis enacted a specific leniency, if you will, when it came to water access. And we're going to come back to this over the next couple of days. Now that we've established that, I want to get into the final topic of today's class, which is really what the title of today's class was about. That when, here, let me just see what I wrote. Right. Walls got open space. When to replace. So this concept, and that's really going to touch on what we just said, which is when do I have to do something about the fact that there's spaces in the walls? When do I have to put something else there? And so the Gemara starts off at the bottom of 10a with a statement from Levi, and that says that an alley, a mavoi, that is wider than 20 amos, so that's obviously way bigger than the 10 amos opening that we allow. And so he says, just take a beam and a small one like this, put it straight in the middle. Now you have 10 on each side, and this side post is lechi in the middle. So that's now separating it into two spaces of 10, and so you have two openings of 10. That's fine. And then the Gemara, then he retracts. Basically, the Gemara immediately retracts. From Levi himself retracts and says, no. That's the ruling does not follow that. The ruling does not follow that statement. That would not work. And the reason given for that, as Rashi points out, is because you have this tiny post in the middle, huge spaces on either side of it. The space kind of on the sides, and this is what we're going to be discussing now. When does the space on the sides overwhelm the standing portion? And over here, when you have 10 amos on either side of this minute post, we say that the space on both sides, asya vira the haigisa, the ear on this side, the haigisa, and on the ear on this side, and it cancels out, it nullifies the beam in the middle. So the question is, what do you do when you have such a big space? What do you do? So Shmuel, now quoting Levi, so we're back to Levi, but his actual solution says you make a post that is not your typical post. You make a post that's wall sized, minimum wall size. What do I mean by that? You take a post that is 10 tfachim high, 10 handbreadths high, and for the sake of argument, handbreadth is about 4 inches, maybe 4.5. So let's say that high, and 10 cubits long. Okay, so 4 cubits long. I'm switching back between the entrance. Right, so 10 handbreadths high and 4 cubits, about 6 feet wide. So that is a minimum sized wall, height and length. It's also the minimum size that a mavoi needs to be considered a mavoi. An alley, right? We've touched on that already. Minimum length of an alley wall is 4 cubits. So take this panel and put that to the length of the mavoi, to the length of the alley. That's one way to do it, and that ostensibly would be in the middle. So you have a 20 amma opening, but now you slack down the middle, not a kind of a minute amount, but rather a panel which is in and of itself a mavoi length. So now, once you put that panel down, the space that's left on either side, which is about 8 cubits on either side, we can consider each of those as separate openings to separate mavois. So you have that new introduction of that new mavoi wall, and now you have 2 separate openings. That is one way to solve it. The Gemara brings a different solution and says like this. Like Rabbi Yehuda says that talking about a slightly different sized opening, but when you have a mavoi, an alley with a 15 cubit opening, or rather that the side was 15 cubits and you want to close it off. So the Gemara says that you should distance from the wall 2 cubits. So you have the wall here, make space 2 cubits, put in a panel 3 cubits, and then you're left with 10 cubits open. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's solution, how to close up that space in a minimal fashion without too much work. So now the Gemara is going to challenge that and figure out what's with those amounts, what's with those amounts of 2 and 3, and what's with these measurements, and I want to point out that an important thing to remember over here is we're trying ostensibly to figure out what the baseline is. We're not saying this is what a person should do necessarily, but we're saying we're trying to cover the baseline of what's kosher. What's the baseline of what is considered a closed off side. And when we get to the end of this topic, you'll see why that is. Why, or at least one of the reasons why we're only looking for a baseline. I mean, one reason is because we want to make sure to enable people to know that they're actually fulfilling the Shabbos. If you make a large baseline, but really you're okay with less, then as you know, but you think you need more, then as soon as something happens, you think that you're transgressing, which is never a good thing for the mind to for any part of you to think that you're doing something wrong when you're actually not. But we're going to get more into what that is. Let's cover the topic first. So basically, the Gemara says, one second, what's with the space of 2 and closing 3? Why not make a post of 1.5 cubits, then jump 2 cubits, and then make another post of 1.5 cubits? So the Gemara is not necessarily saying that that's a better solution, although perhaps you can argue that it is, because you're starting off with a piece of wall and then you're having another piece of wall. So like you're seeing that there's a continuation over here. But the Gemara wants to prove several points. And that's part of what the Gemara sometimes will do, is that on the way to getting to what it actually wants to say, it's going to knock out several other options just to prove some points. So the Gemara starts off saying, one second, why don't we say 1.5 space 2, another 1.5? And the Gemara says, well, the fact that we're not saying that's not an option, because remember, the Gemara gave 2 options already. One of putting that panel in the middle, and one of the making a space and then a small panel. So the Gemara says, obviously, from the fact that we're not saying that, so we see from there, Omein meruba ala paritz mishtei ruchos lo havi omed, that when the standing portion is greater than the open portion, but you need to combine 2 sides, that doesn't work. So over here, you have 1.5 on this side, 1.5 on this side standing. The middle is open of 2. So either side on its own does not cancel out the middle, but the 2 sides together does cancel out the middle. So from the fact that we don't use that example, well, that we see from there that you can't use the standing portion of the wall on 2 sides of an opening to work. That won't work for the standing part to close up the open part to work when there's an open part that's greater than it. So the Gemara says, no, that's actually not a proof, because really maybe you can combine the 2 standing parts, but over here we have a different problem. The second post, the 1.5 post that's in the middle, has ear of 2 cubits on one side and ear of 10 cubits on the other side of it. So as we said earlier on 10a from Levi, when we can't put the little post in the middle because you have space of 10 and space of 10 on either side of it, and that cancels out the post. So over here you have a space of 2 and a space of 10 on either side of a 1.5 post. So those 2 ears cancel out the standing post in the middle. So if it had been just 5 and the space in between was 2 and 1.5 on either side, that would be totally fine. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So why don't we say, make a post 1, space 1, post 1, space 1, and then post 1. So 1, 1, 1. And for every 1, you have a space. Then you don't have the issue of having ear on both sides knocking it out, because the ear on one side may be 10, but the ear on the other side is only 1. Ear of 1 does not knock out a 1. So now we go back to the other argument that you're using. The reason why that won't work is because actually, we see from there that when the standing portion and the open portion are equal, that doesn't work either. So originally we were trying to prove whether standing portion being less than open portion, that for sure, that now we're going to say for sure doesn't work. But what about when the standing and the open and the closed portion of the wall are equal? So we have proof now from the fact that we can say 1, 1, 1, that omed kaparitz, when the standing part of the wall and the open part of the wall is equal, that also does not work. So the Gemara says actually that you don't have a proof to that. Really, it would work to have 1, 1, 1 as far as when you're comparing standing space, meaning closed wall, to open wall. The problem over here is, again, like we knocked out the first part, which is that the ear on either side of it is going to knock it out, even though the ear is equal to it. But since the ear is at least equal, if not greater to it, so the 10 amma space on one side, the 10 cubit space on one side, and the 1 cubit space on the other side of this 1 cubit post is going to make that negligible, knock it out. So now we can't do any of those permutations. So the Gemara says, well, I have an example. I have a case where it actually will solve all the issues, right? So this is really what the Gemara was. This is my argument. This is what the Gemara was structuring itself to do from the beginning. The Gemara wanted to prove those points or not prove them and show when the space on either side does knock it out or doesn't, and when you need standing and open space equal, not equal. The Gemara is bringing out those points, but the Gemara essentially was coming to say this final point, which is, I have a scenario which covers all those bases and is not the original case. So the Gemara says, what about having why don't we take a space from the wall, the first cubit from the wall, open ear. Then have a post 1.5 cubits, then another space of 1, and then another post of 1.5 cubits. So basically you're having small space, larger closure, small space, larger closure. And the reason why that's ideal, the ears are not combining because the ear is less than the post, and then you don't have such a big hole. There's no place that you have such a big hole. The original solution, which Rav Yehuda brought, was to have a space of 2 and a post of 3. So we're saying split the space in half and split the post in half, and have 2 spaces of 1 and 2 posts of 1.5. Therefore, you don't end up with too big of a space. So the Gemara ends off, and this is really a very key point, not just in our discussion here in Eruvin, but rather as a general rule, as something for that equal for everybody to take a lesson from, which is the Gemara says, you're right, enachanami. True. V'kuli hai lo yatrachu rabbanan. The rabbis were not concerned. The rabbis did not want to trouble someone more than necessary. Now, any of you who've done anything with carpentry or building, putting up a standalone post with no foundation, very hard to get that to stay there. A post of 3 cubits to anchor that to the ground, that's 1 post, and it's a large one. Much easier. Less posts, so that, like the last case, which is 2 posts of 1.5 cubits, not attached to any wall, is a lot harder to anchor. So that's going to be it's a lot bigger of a deal to try to situate that. And the rabbis, even though ideally we do want less open spaces, but we're not going to trouble people. We want really the truth is we want Judaism to be accessible. As Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, the Ramchal, states at the beginning of his magnum opus, Mesilas Yesharim, Path of the Righteous, that man is job is to enjoy with God, that we were here to enjoy God's presence and to enjoy being together with Him, enjoy a connection with Him. I always say that if you're not finding your Judaism enjoyable, then there's probably something that you should be doing better or different. Probably different. So that's really the lesson that the Talmud is saying over here. The rabbis were not trying to make things more difficult. And if we found a solution that involved less work, we're going to stick to that. I'm going to wrap things up. Basically, just a couple points. The Gemara then says 1 second, but then we have a different problem, which is we have now a smaller entrance next to the larger entrance. And we know that if people start using the smaller entrance, and leaving the larger entrance open, then that larger entrance is no longer an entrance, it's just a wide open space in the wall. That's a problem. So the Gemara says basically two things. One is that people don't leave a wide opening where they can easily get into just to squeeze through a smaller opening. And number two, it's really only a problem of having a smaller entrance near the larger entrance when it's on the side. When it's coming from the side and you can make a shortcut through it, so that makes sense that people would start, we're concerned that people would start using that as their primary entrance. But when it's right there and it's a couple steps away and it's also not harder to get through, we're not concerned. And the page just basically finishes up bringing another case where we have a similar concept. Arha Asla, the seat of a toilet, basically. It was a portable toilet seat, and also similar idea of once I mentioned it, I'm going to just briefly, the concept of impurity being transferred. When there's something impure under a awning, under a cover that is at least one handbreadth wide, so the awning will transfer impurity from an impure object under it to anything else under that canopy. So the question is, a toilet seat, which has an opening in the middle, how big do the slats on the side and the opening in the middle have to be for it to be considered closed, that the impurity would transfer to something under it, that space would be considered closed? And the Gemara basically goes through a similar concept to us trying to figure out this wall space and how far apart the slats in the wall have to be. And the Gemara basically has a very similar discussion in regards to that. Thank you very much. I know that was a ton today. I hope that I broke it down and said that clearly enough. And let's continue that light shining. I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, sorry, right. So questions. I'm going to take some questions now. Okay, from Sharon Friend Brooks. Where do these technicalities continue to be applicable for us today? Or are we only looking at these technicalities as a study in analytical methodology? So, both. First of all, we continue any place where observant Jews live and want to be able to carry in their yard, on their street. Most streets, or at least side streets today, are not halachically, are not legal, Jewishly legally a public domain, and therefore you'd be able to close them off using the principles that we're talking about over here. And as Rabbi Parry mentioned, he's been involved in the LA Eruv. There is an enclosure, if you will, using these principles going around really the whole city of LA. I have toured that myself. So these are definitely applicable today in a sense of being used. They're also definitely being used for the analytical methodology. Some of the principles over here are really somewhat more abstract because they're not the final decision of the halacha that we follow, but altogether brings us to this common space, and it's used. Steve Holan, I am confused. I can't visualize this space. A visual would be helpful. I totally get that. I meant to show the pictures more often. If you were able to share, the specific case that was being hard for you, I'd love to share that. You can email us and I can share, and I'll start off tomorrow with that. That would actually be most effective. Wanda Mignucci says that she likes all my rings. Thank you. They are also for show, but also for medical reasons. Anybody who has, I don't have arthritis, but it's a different condition that is a issue with my ligaments, and it keeps my fingers attached. So anybody who has issues with their fingers, let me know and I will hook you up. And finally, Von Billow says, with the subject of walls, in regards to the tabernacle and temple with the veil, wasn't that a wall and did that work? If I'm understanding your question correctly, yes, it was. And that did work. It was even the curtain was anchored at the bottom. And we're going to get into that really. Really, that's going to be more relevant in the Tractate of Sukkah, because it's very connected to a lot of the principles over here, because of the measuring and when there's open spaces. And one of the things you find by a sukkah, really by an Eruv also, is sometimes you're relying on a wall that's flimsy, that's like a tarp. And depending on how much that moves in the wind, if it moves up, if the sway is within 3 handbreadths, that would be considered a proper wall. And so yeah, that's the answer to the question is yes. Even with a curtain, that could be counted as a wall. As a matter of fact, when I did tour the Los Angeles Eruv surrounding the city, there were places that at the time for sure that did come into play. So any further questions, please share with them overnight. I will try to get to them tomorrow.